Hi, and welcome to the F Word. I'm your racing driver and host, Daniela Sutton. I am exploring the world of extremely fast females. This episode, I'm extremely excited to welcome a Commonwealth and Olympic athlete, Adele Nicoll. So, can you please tell us a bit about yourself for everyone listening?
So, like you said, I am an Olympic and Commonwealth athlete. I compete in the bobsleigh for Great Britain, but I also compete in the shot put, which is part of track and field. And I have been doing sports since I was 9 years old, and I've only ever competed in fast sports.
So, how did you get into the sport then at such a young age?
Literally just through sports day. So I was really keen to do everything, but I think from the age of 9 to 15, I was literally competing in anything possible, netball, football, hockey, um, sprinting, jumping, throwing, everything. I did dance, swimming, kickboxing. So I think I just had a really good basis of a lot of different sports and built a lot of skills from a young age.
So you really enjoyed like getting involved in every single sport that you could grasp your hands on.
Yeah, definitely. I think mum and dad encouraged me to try everything. And they were always really good at encouraging me to explore new opportunities because they instilled in me from quite a young age that you're never going to know unless you try. And I think I've carried that through with me into adulthood. And that's why now I rarely say no to any opportunities.
I think I was often the quickest runner in my sports day, and I think that's probably translated over to racing, or I hope so anyway. Um, so yeah, I suppose if you enjoy sports at a young age, then you're more likely to continue that through adulthood as well. And it's not a bad thing to do either because it's healthy, and if you love it, then who's to stop you?
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
so your primary and current specialty is bobsledding, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
But that's not the only sport that you've competed in, as you already mentioned. You do shot putting and you have done discus throwing as well. Is that right?
Yeah.
Um, so what is the transition like between the different sports then?
To be fair, I think from the outside, a lot of people assume that the throwing events are a lot different to with the bobsleigh. And now that I am a pilot and I drive the bobsleigh, yes, there's so many different elements. But when I first started bobsleigh, I joined as a brakewoman, and as a brakewoman, you are responsible for moving the sled as fast as possible at the start, and then you get in, and then your job is done. So with the sled weighing like 175 kilos, having to push that from standstill and getting the velocity as high as possible is not too dissimilar to throwing a heavy weighted object and trying to get it as far as possible by using speed. So yeah, there's a lot of crossover elements with the sports because they're both power based sports. And I think that the transition for me was it was difficult. I would say at the start because I hadn't run for a long time properly because I was only doing little bits here and there in training, but I had to shift my training to become more of a dual sport athlete. And I think that was difficult because I had to do all of the basic training to get my body ready for putting load through the ground on ice in spikes. And then obviously I didn't get a lot of time to throw, which means I lost a lot of technical time there. So it was about managing my time and trying to compartmentalize the fact that over the winter I was a bobsledder and in the summer I was a bobsledder, but was still trying to compete in track and field. And I think that just that transition from throwing into bobsleigh taught me a lot about myself as well because I really had to dig deep in a lot of moments to transform my body from one thing into another. And it actually overall made me a much better athlete. And I came back into athletics in the summer after my second season of bobsledding and I threw a personal best. I also did the same again this year. So they obviously complement each other very well. And I'd say that's not just about the physical side of things, but also my maturity as an athlete with how much graft I've had to put into bobsleigh because it's a really tough sport.
Yeah, of course. And as a racing driver, sometimes we'll be asked to jump from car to car, and each car will handle differently. So I suppose
Yeah,
it's like the same, you have the same concept, so you know where you need to brake, you know where you need to accelerate, but the car will handle differently in different situations. So I suppose jumping from sport to sport, it's the same. fundamentals, the same strength, but just applied in a different way.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it's really interesting how much I feel like I can relate to that with the bobsleigh because if we jump in a different sled, it handles differently. So I'm a monobob pilot, but I'm also a two-woman pilot. So that means I drive a single woman sled, but I also drive a two-woman sled, and they are completely different sleds. But I have to race in one sled on the Saturday and a different sled on the Sunday. And that's the skill in itself, is being able to jump in and out of different sleds. Like you said, the same with the cars.
You know, because obviously, I suppose in a two-person sled, there'll be a different weight distribution as
Yeah,
well. So
heavier,
it
yeah.
will handle a lot differently cornering. So can you tell me a bit about like how it handles differently between the two different
Yeah.
sleds?
Yeah. So well the two woman sled is bigger and it's heavier. But it's also manufactured differently. So the monobob sled is a standardized sled, which is the same across all countries. However, the two woman sled at present can be different. So my sled is, let's say it's BTC, which is from Latvia, whereas the American sled and the German sled are manufactured in their own countries because they have this government funding to, government funding or private funding to build their own sleds. Whereas we don't have that in Great Britain, so um, we've bought other equipment that's available in different countries. And the materials that they use will really affect the handling. But one of the biggest things that affects the handling is the runners. So a lot of people don't know that there's four blades underneath the sled, which we call runners, and they're essentially our wheels. So we have four, and they can be changed exactly like you could change tires. So we would change these runner blades. Um, we would change them depending on the track, the weather, like if the ice was hard or soft. If the track was really difficult, we might go for a more controlled set of runners, which would be a runner that is a little bit thinner, a smaller radius. The faster the runner, generally the faster the runner, because less you have less control as well. So it's always about weighing up those different types of things. And steering a bobsleigh, you have two different D rings. So two plastic D rings attached to bungees, which are attached to a steering plate, which then you control the runners. Um, but you don't necessarily just turn left and right with a bobsleigh. You you are manipulating the G force that you feel, and the profile of the track. Every single track in the world is different, but the profile of the corners will determine what you need to do. So yes, it might be a right hand corner, but on that right hand corner, you might be experiencing three different pressures because of the shape of the corner and the radius of the corner, which means that basically the profile of the corner will tell you where you need to manipulate the pressure. So the tighter the radius, the higher the pressure. So it's all about finding the fast lines as well. So sometimes you might not want to manipulate the pressure too much because it might be really slow, but you also have to do enough to know that it's safe. So yeah, it's
It's very
interesting.
interesting. It's like obviously you see it on TV or you can see it on videos and stuff, and it doesn't look as intricate as you've just explained it there.
Yeah.
And obviously you are an athlete, and sometimes people say to me in racing, "Oh, all you do is push pedals and turn a wheel." Or
Yeah.
change gears, and I'm like, yeah, but it's a lot more than that because if they sat in
Yeah.
the car and tried to drive it how a racing driver drove it, they'd probably go off because they
Yeah. They'd crash.
they can't predict
It,
what's going to happen. Um, and I'm sure you've probably had instances like that yourself where people have just gone, oh, it looks
yeah.
easy.
There's absolutely no way that you would be able to sit in a bobsleigh and make it down to the bottom of the track if you didn't know anything about it, or like no one off the street could jump into a bobsleigh and get down because you just wouldn't understand it. Like I'd say bobsleigh is more off of feeling than it is off of like just general ability. You learn a lot, and you learn, like you said, predicting what's going to happen is really important, but also knowing like if you've gone wrong, how to take it back and create the outcome you want to when you haven't gone into the situation the most ideal way. We always talk about having plan A, plan B, plan C.
That's like a quite very similar to racing again. Obviously, it's a different form of racing, like of a completely different track on ice, which I'm sure you can do ice racing. I'm sure Red Bull have probably done that at some point with cars.
Probably.
but yeah, I totally understand that the different setup, the predicting everything, the element of unpredictability sometimes as well, in different changing conditions. Say whether I don't know whether the track conditions for you can change from like day to day.
Oh yeah,
Um,
depending on the weather.
yeah. So obviously, the track conditions for us can change from day to day, and you might not have driven that track in the wet before, or you might not have driven it in the dry before, but it's that trusting in your machine and trusting in yourself that you know what to do in that situation because you've practiced for that. And it's up to you at the end of the day behind the wheel, and behind the
Yeah,
bobsleigh for you.
yeah, definitely. Um, and like you just mentioned about like your machine, and it's interesting because actually, like in the winter sport world, they kind of refer to bobsleigh as like F1 on ice because it's so similar in terms of like the things that we're speaking about. Except our engine is our athlete. So we push the sled and get it as fast as possible and get the velocity, and then we get in. And then obviously you've got the driver. Um, but it's a mechanical sport. So one thing that I got thrown in the deep end with was the mechanical side of things. Like I never had any mechanical background growing up or didn't study anything like that. And I came into like a completely unfunded setup and I was self-funding things and I was like my own mechanic. So I had to learn how to do that. And like even now, bobsledders will do their own mechanics and we have some help from our support staff. Some nations have full-time mechanics, but we Great Britain don't have a full-time mechanic. So we have driving coaches and we have athletes, and together we figure it out. So it's incredible that we're even competing with some of the best in the world when the best in the world have a full funded setup.
Well, that shows the absolute dedication to you. And I don't come from a mechanical background. When I was doing karting, um, my dad basically said that I'm a sponge because I'm young, so I can take
Yeah,
all the information in and learn how to do the mechanics on the car. And then if he forgets how to do something, I can remind him or I can teach him how to do
yeah,
something. He said that because we don't come from a mechanical background either. My dad's a truck driver and my stepmom's a
oh,
receptionist. So
yeah,
when we first joined the Daniel Ricciardo Series UK Championship when I was around 12 years old, um, he basically said that we worked together on this to figure it out, to do all the mechanics. We didn't even know how to change a sprocket at one point.
yeah.
So to do
But
the
yeah,
gearing on the cart, because we thought that the chain being loose meant that it was broken. When you just unloosen the engine and push it forward to tighten the chain, it was just completely new to us. But
yeah,
I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed the mechanics in the end of it. And my
yeah.
dad would say, "Go out there and strip your cart down fully." And prepare the cart for the next race weekend. And he'd leave me for hours outside by myself in the sun, rain, wind, whatever. And I'd just be
Figuring it out.
figuring out or cleaning the car or like deep cleaning the car or rebuilding carburetors. Um, so I totally understand like where you come from, saying that you're not mechanically minded or come from a mechanical background, but you work together with your team to get the best performance out of you and out of the bobsleigh as well.
Yeah.
Um, so it must be insane. As you said, you represent Great Britain for the Olympics and for the Commonwealth and everything. That must be insane. I can't imagine being in front of crowds and TV and everything, but I suppose I've already been in front of crowds and TV and everything.
Yeah.
Um, so how does it feel for you being in front of that many people?
I think because I'd say from a young age I've had like a gradual introduction to it. I've been competing internationally since I was maybe 13, 14 was when I started competing for Wales um, in athletics. And then I did my first Great Britain International when I was 16. I went to the World Youth Championships. And from then, I think I had a very good introduction because I feel like it came quite steadily, if that makes sense. So then it wasn't a big shock when I got then to an Olympic Games or a Commonwealth Games. However, I will say that the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham in 2022 was insane. Even then, for me, standing inside that stadium, there was like 40,000 people, like completely full stadium, and it was like the night I was competing was like the prime night. You also had the men's 100-meter final on at the exact same time I was competing, so it was just a completely like electric atmosphere, and that was probably the biggest like experience. Even though obviously I was at the Olympic Games, but it happened over COVID, so it wasn't the experience that I think I could have had it have been outside of uh, COVID times. So I am really looking forward to future Olympic Games because I feel like I have unfinished business and I also have experiences yet to come with the Olympic Games. Just because we experienced an Olympic Games during COVID, which had a lot of restrictions. We didn't have a crowd. It was really different, I think, to any other games. But yeah, the Commonwealth Games was amazing in Birmingham. I think it being a home game has made such a difference as well.
Yeah, of course. And um, obviously, such a big crowd, such a big atmosphere. That must be nerve-wracking as well for you. Um,
Yeah, yeah, it's just, being on the spot, being expected to perform to the best that you could possibly perform, but on demand as well. Yeah, athletics is a different type of nervous, I guess, because I'm stood there and I'm on my own, and it's about producing the best I could possibly produce in a sport that is consistent. Whereas bobsleigh is an inconsistent sport because something can, like, the weather changes everything. So your time on the track one year can be completely different to your time on the track the next year. Whereas obviously throwing or sprinting or jumping, it's consistent. So you're constantly just trying to be better and better and better. And I think then you can become really harsh on yourself. Like with bobsleigh, there's so many different things that could go wrong that I think you're able to stand back and give yourself a little bit more credit or analyze things a little bit better. But with athletics, you're constantly expecting more from yourself, and I think that can be quite difficult sometimes.
yeah, so I suppose in racing that's the same. You have to be critical on yourself though, as an athlete, as any a sports person. You have to be critical if you want to make it in your sport because you see all the top sports people, they're constantly analysing themselves, constantly working on themselves. And that's the standard that you have to work towards. You have to work towards that standard that it gets to the point where you're analysing the tiniest differences, the micro differences that most people would not see at all. And sometimes people just don't understand that as well. Like when you try to explain to them as a racing driver, I try to explain to them, but the inch turn in a wheel difference can make you go like 5 tenths slower. They don't understand how it correlates. And 5 tenths as well doesn't seem a lot to someone who
It's
doesn't
massive. 5 tenths
race.
is huge.
Yeah, but it's a lot. That's the difference between first and 10th place, maybe even
Yeah,
more,
yeah,
depending on the day, depending on the conditions, like and the track as well. Obviously, if it's a longer track, then it's not as much of a difference. But it's just all these factors that people don't understand, and it's hard to explain it to them. But hopefully, these podcasts for ordinary people will hope like enlighten them to the lives of athletes, the lives of people in their area of expertise, and what it's actually like, and not just what they perceive from the outside. And I feel like when they see the like failures or quote failures that you have, so you've finished like 10th and they see the people in the first, second, and third, but 10th is really good for where you're at because you might not have ever been to that track before, or you
yeah,
might be with a new team or a new car, or you might have had loads of
yeah. Like
struggles
I've
over the
seen.
weekend. They don't see the little steps that have the little wins, which I talked about with someone else on another podcast. They don't see the little wins behind the big wins or even the losses at the end. They're
Yeah,
not
like you
directly
can.
inside.
I've had so many races where I've been disappointed with my result, but I also get frustrated because I know that the people at home won't understand why necessarily that result might have happened. And it can often be because you've made a mechanical error before the race, you've not set the sled up properly, especially like talk like I know we're probably going to go on to talk about some like setbacks, and it comes back, it comes in here. So at the start of October, I was supposed to be leaving for my World Cup preseason training, and I rolled my ankle and I ruptured my ACFL ligament. So I was in a boot, and that was a really scary time because a ruptured ligament can take so long to fix, and then also like the rehab to get it back to where it was can be a long process. So I managed to get back in time for the first World Cup race, which was the 8th of December. However, I was nowhere near full fitness. I had only just started running. Like I'd lost so much time on the track, on the athletics track, sprinting, that I knew I wasn't going to be where I needed to be with my push start. And then that affects so much with the downtime because the velocity you create at the start is what you rely on then to have the speed on the track. As long as you can drive well. If you drive rubbish, you're gonna just completely kill all the speed you built at the start anyway. So what you need is a good start and a good drive. But I knew I was gonna be down on the push. Anyway, I got back to my first race, and like I said earlier, you have a monobob race on the Saturday and the two-woman race on the Sunday. The monobob race went well. I was nowhere near where I needed to be on the push, but I think I pushed like 17th in the field and finished 13th at the end. So I outdrove like, you know, 4 or 5 different places on the track, which when you outdrive people on the track would have had an advantage at the start. That's something you can be proud of. And obviously people might see that and think, oh, you know, is she happy that she came 13th? Because I'm always aiming for top tens in the world. And I'm like, well, yeah, I am, because considering I couldn't walk a few weeks ago, yeah, I'm proud of 13th from the World Cup. But, you know, people don't always see it like that. Anyway, then second day, racing in the two-woman, where I push on the pilot bar on the side of the sled, I went to switch my hand to load in and jump into the sled, and I put my foot a little bit too close to the sled, and I ran over my foot and it cut my foot open. But you've got no choice. You can't stop. I had to get in. So I've jumped in, got into the sled, and I've got to drive down the hardest track in the world, which is renownedly known. It's Altenburg in Germany. And I had to drive down the track knowing that I had just run over my foot, not knowing what the result of that was going to be. I just knew it hurt quite a lot, but the adrenaline saw me through. And I was really proud of how I actually managed to drive the track, considering my focus was completely disorientated. And then I got to the bottom, and then I was like, oh my gosh, my foot. And then the medical team attended straight away. And then I had to go to the hospital and get my foot stitched up because I had cut it so deeply. And then I've been put back in a boot again now, because where the cut is, it's round my big toe, like my metatarsal, the main one in the foot. And if you walk and flex that, it's going to constantly keep opening the wound. So I've had to have my foot put back in the boot for it to be rigid, but it's the other foot to what was in a boot 8 weeks ago, well, 6 weeks ago. So yeah, I've had a crazy time since October with injuries and setbacks. So I think that I can fully relate to what you say there, where you might get some. Oh, and I still came 13th in that race in the end,
That's
in the
fantastic. Well
two-woman
done.
race. So I finished that weekend with two 13th places in the World Cup. Bear in mind, obviously, like my target is always a top 10. So finish just outside of that with everything that was going on. I was super proud of that. But, you know, people looking on the outside that haven't got a clue what you've been through might think that that was a failed race. That was a disappointing race. And you know what? Like, that was one of my proud races, because I showed like some resilience there.
That's fantastic. Well, I can't imagine racing myself with my foot half open. That
Yeah.
would just be painful and dangerous in some ways as well. And I
Yeah.
suppose you go out there and you kind of accept the danger that you're facing.
Yeah.
Because as a racing driver,
For
you're
sure.
going upwards of 100 miles per hour with over 20 other cars on the track with you, and you kind of come to terms with that and think, well, I've got all the safety around me. I've got my helmet on. I've got my hands device on. I've got my suit on, my boots, but nothing can really prepare you for if anything does happen. And I
Yeah.
actually had a concussion and passed out from a crash that I had. And I
Yeah.
was out of, because the concussion protocol is you have to wait. I think it's 25 days or 24 days.
Yeah,
21
we
days,
have
something like
we
that.
have 21 days.
Yeah, 21 days. But you have to also, for motorsports, you have to get cleared by a specialist doctor in Cambridge.
Oh,
So I didn't actually make it in time to get on track for the next race weekend, which was
yeah,
21 days later. So it was actually closer than most of the races are like 30 days-ish apart, like a month apart. But this one was 21 days, which was too close, unfortunately. So I didn't make the last race weekend of the year. But I totally understand, like it can be disheartening as well. When you're seeing all your other competitors and people go out there and compete and you just itch to get back out. You want to get back out, you want to do fitness, you want to do it all, which people don't see. Um, so yeah, I totally understand. And people don't see how much effort you put in as well beforehand. And I know that you lost 20 kilograms or nearly 20 kilograms to convert to bobsleighing,
yeah.
which is absolutely fantastic. So how did that feel for you?
I mean, it was one of those things where so bobsleigh has a weight limit. So you want to be as heavy as possible because it's a gravity sport at the end of the day. Like you might some of the tracks is like falling out of a five-story building. It's that much of a drop. Like it's crazy. So you want to be as heavy as possible. Um, but you have to be under the weight limit. I assume they try and put that in for, I guess safety is one of the reasons they put it in, but also to have some fairness, I guess, across the board to make sure everybody has the same weight so that you're on a level playing field. So essentially, if you're not at that weight as an athlete, you'd then put weight into the sled. But it's all about compatibility between the driver and the brake woman. You're given a total weight limit of the women have 330, and the that includes the sled as well, which can be minimum weight 170. But you have to work within that 330 kilos, and you either put weight in the sled or the weight is on the athlete. And usually it's better if it's on the athletes because then you have an empty sled to push. But if it's on the athletes, those athletes have to make sure that they can move well. So, bobsleigh is a sport where you have some of the biggest, most powerful athletes in the world because you're heavy, but you're fast and you're strong. So yeah, I've got so much respect for a lot of bobsleigh athletes because they are just phenomenal workhorses. To be honest, like we're just it's so many dimensions as well. Like you have to do so much of your own work on and off the track that a lot of sports don't have. I know athletics doesn't because obviously I come from athletics and I know that there's so much work that goes into athletics, but in a very different way. Just like you're not doing as much manual graft when you're away from the track in athletics, whereas we could be in the garage for hours sorting stuff out. There's a lot of lifting and shifting heavy objects. Um, but yeah, when I lost the weight, I came in at like 97 kilo, dropped down to 77 kilos, and now I'm around. I am always around. I'd say my middle ground's 80 kilos now.
It's fantastic and shows absolute dedication and determination from you as well to lose such weight and to put that into perspective. That's like a third of my weight is 20 kilograms because I'm 66-ish, 64-ish, something like that. Um, which is like chop me into three pieces, and then that's how much weight you've lost, which is crazy, and it's just
Yeah, it's mental. When I go into the
amazing.
gym and I pick up a 20 kilo plate, I'm like, oh my God, how have I lost this amount of weight? It's crazy. But yeah, I just think like as well as the physical side of things, like genuinely like the mindset and the mental side of things has been huge for me in the growth in the last few years. And yeah, I found my focus again. I feel like I'd slightly lost my focus with lots of other things that was going on in my life at the time, but I feel very focused right now, and like that's why I'm able to deal with the setbacks quite well because I posted something on Instagram this morning actually, and it's that the vision is bigger than any challenge that I could face, so it just keeps me going.
Well, yeah, that's obviously the motivation is that you get back out there and get back doing what you love. I
Yeah,
suppose that's the same for me with my racing and everything. Like if you've had a setback, then you see the end goal, and that gives you motivation to keep pushing and keep going, which is really hard to do. And for someone who's not a non-athlete or someone who doesn't understand, it's kind of hard for them to grasp the idea that that is
Yeah.
your life and that is your way of living, and your joy and your source of joy and happiness in some cases as well.
Mm.
So obviously we've talked a lot about setbacks, but you've had a lot of achievements as well. So you have golds in the is it British Athletics Championship? And you
Yeah.
have a silver in is it the World Bobsleigh
Yeah. The
Championship
Bobsleigh
as
World
well?
Cup.
Yeah, which is
Yeah.
amazing. And which would you say is like your favorite or your best accolade or achievement?
I think coming back into athletics and winning the British Championships when people had counted me out of the sport because I'd transitioned into bobsleigh was an amazing feeling because I had like proved so many people wrong, but I'd also paved a way for the next generation to come through and realize that they don't have to be one dimensional. They can do whatever they want to do. And it's all about compartmentalizing, working smart and working hard. Um, and that was a great achievement. And the silver medal was from when I was a brakewoman, but I also got my own silver medal this last season in March at the Lake Placid World Cup. And I would say that's probably up there with my best achievements because when I went out to Lake Placid, I was self-funding my two-woman career. And I didn't have the funding or the money to ship my sled over from the UK to North America. So I rented a sled from the Americans for that World Cup race, and they gave me one of their older sleds that they used for training or for development athletes, whilst they were in their uh, brand new BMW like funded sled. And yeah, we weren't expecting much, and we only went out there to learn the track because we have world champs at that North America track this year. Um, so we were like, right, let's just go and get some experience. Doesn't matter what sled we're in, just go and learn the track. And we ended up winning a silver medal at that World Cup, and that was my first silver medal as a pilot. And I was only in my second year of driving, so that I think was a record for how quickly a novice British driver had gone, male or female, had gone from being a novice to winning a World Cup medal. So that was a great achievement for me. Again, not necessarily just because of the silverware, but because of defying the odds and, just showing that you don't have to come from a certain place or have certain things to achieve success. So that was one of my best achievements.
That's fantastic. And it shows that how much your dedication has paid off. And sometimes in the worst of situations, it can actually be the best of situations. Um,
Yeah.
and that you don't always, as you said, need to come from the best situation to perform and improve. So, um, I think I'm gonna have to cut it there.
Yeah, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I'm
So,
looking at the time. We've been chatting for
yeah.
ages, but it's really good. It's all very organic.
Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. It's been fantastic to have you here. I've really enjoyed learning about you and learning about your bobsleigh and all your other sports as well in athletics and everything. So, for listeners, this is the F word. Thank you so much for joining me, Adele. And I hope you all have a fantastic Christmas. See you next time. Please share, subscribe, and download to the show as we explore the world of extremely fast females.